Imagine this: you wake up one morning and the world feels off. At first, you can't quite put your finger on it. The sky is still blue, the coffee tastes the same, and the news headlines scroll across your screen as they always do. But something deeper has shifted. Words, those ordinary, mundane tools you use every day, have begun to feel heavier, sharper, more alive. They no longer sit passively in sentences. Instead, they seem to pulse with intent, shaping not just what you say, but how you think, feel, and see the world around you. What if these words aren't merely vehicles for communication? What if they are architects of your reality? Now consider this unsettling paradox: the very language you rely on to navigate life, the words that allow you to name objects, express emotions, and construct meaning, might also be imprisoning you. Think about it. Every word carries baggage, an invisible weight of associations, biases, and assumptions built over centuries. When you call someone lazy, does the label reveal truth or impose it? When you describe a situation as hopeless, are you observing reality or creating it? And when societies agree to call war peacekeeping or exploitation opportunity, who decides which version of reality becomes real? Pause here and ask yourself, how much of your life is shaped by the words you've inherited? How often do you stop to question whether those words align with your experience or distort it? Most people never do. Instead, they drift through life accepting language as neutral, objective, even benign. Yet beneath its surface lies a hidden power so profound that it shapes everything from individual identities to global ideologies. To ignore this force is to surrender control, not just over your thoughts, but over your entire existence. But let's take it further. Picture yourself standing at the edge of a vast, shimmering lake. Its surface reflects the sky above like a mirror, but as you step closer, you notice something strange. It's not water beneath your feet. It's glass. Fragile, translucent glass separating you from an abyss so deep it seems infinite. Each word you speak sends faint cracks spiderwebbing outward, threatening to shatter the illusion of stability. And yet, despite knowing how precarious your position is, you hesitate to move forward or backward. Why? Because somewhere in the back of your mind, you've convinced yourself that staying exactly where you are is safer than risking change. This frozen moment mirrors the human condition, the tension between our desire for clarity and our fear of losing control. Here's the haunting truth: words don't just describe reality, they create it. From the moment you learn to speak, you begin constructing a mental map of the world using language. Trees become trees, feelings become sadness or joy, actions become right or wrong. These labels give structure to chaos, transforming raw sensory data into something comprehensible. But what happens when the map doesn't match the territory? What happens when the words you use oversimplify, misrepresent, or outright erase parts of your experience? Do you blame the world for feeling incomplete, or the language you've been given to understand it? Consider the implications. If words shape perception, then whoever controls the words controls the narrative, and by extension, the reality of those who listen. Politicians craft speeches that sway nations. Advertisers spin slogans that mold desires. Even within relationships, partners wield phrases like weapons or lifelines, defining each other's worth with every compliment or criticism. Language isn't passive, it's performative. Every sentence you utter doesn't just reflect your worldview, it reinforces it. Over time, these linguistic loops tighten, pulling you further away from authenticity and closer to conformity. And yet, there's a deeper layer to explore. Beyond their role in communication, words act as filters, determining what you notice and what fades into the background. Linguists have long studied how different languages encode reality differently. Some cultures have dozens of words for snow, while others might lump all forms under a single term. Does this mean speakers of snow-rich languages perceive winter more vividly? Or does it suggest that without the right words, certain aspects of reality remain invisible? Either way, the conclusion is chilling. Your vocabulary doesn't just reflect your reality, it limits it. So now, standing on that fragile pane of glass, staring into the depths below, you must confront an urgent question: are you truly seeing the world as it is, or only as the words you've learned allow you to see it? What untold possibilities lie beyond the boundaries of your current lexicon? And perhaps most importantly, how much of your potential remains locked away because you lack the language to unlock it? To understand why words wield such immense power over your reality, you must first confront an uncomfortable truth: language is not merely a neutral medium of expression, it is a living framework that shapes thought itself. Every word you use carries within it centuries of cultural evolution, societal conditioning, and psychological imprinting. These layers of meaning are so deeply embedded in your consciousness that they often operate beneath the threshold of awareness, subtly guiding how you interpret the world and yourself. Consider the work of Ludwig Wittgenstein, who famously declared, "The limits of my language mean the limits of my world." His insight reveals a profound paradox. While language expands human understanding by allowing us to categorize and communicate complex ideas, it simultaneously constrains perception by reducing infinite possibilities into finite categories. For example, when you label someone as kind or selfish, you're not just describing their behavior, you're collapsing the full spectrum of their actions into a single, static identity. This simplification might make comprehension easier, but it also blinds you to nuance. What if the person labeled selfish acted out of fear rather than malice? Or what if the act deemed kind was motivated by obligation rather than genuine care? Language imposes order, but at what cost? Now let's delve deeper into the psychological roots of this phenomenon. Cognitive scientists have long studied how language influences thought through processes like framing and priming. Framing occurs when the way information is presented alters its perceived meaning. For instance, calling something a crisis versus an opportunity can evoke entirely different emotional responses and decision-making patterns, even if the underlying facts remain unchanged. Priming, on the other hand, involves subtle cues that activate specific associations in the mind. If you read the word yellow, for example, you're more likely to notice yellow objects around you afterward. These mechanisms highlight how language doesn't just reflect reality, it actively constructs it. But perhaps no thinker has explored the psychological weight of language more profoundly than Carl Jung. He introduced the concept of the collective unconscious, a shared reservoir of archetypes and symbols that shape human experience across cultures. Words, according to Jung, serve as vessels for these archetypes, carrying universal meanings that resonate deeply within the psyche. However, this shared symbolism comes with a price. When certain words become dominant, whether through repetition, authority, or cultural consensus, they overshadow alternative perspectives, narrowing the scope of what feels possible. Consider how terms like success or failure carry implicit values tied to productivity, wealth, and status. These definitions aren't inherent truths, they're socially constructed narratives that dictate what you strive for and what you dismiss as unworthy. Friedrich Nietzsche took this critique even further, arguing that language is inherently tied to power dynamics. In his view, words are never neutral, they are tools used by those in authority to enforce conformity and suppress dissent. Think about political rhetoric, where euphemisms like collateral damage sanitize violence, or corporate jargon, where phrases like streamlining operations mask layoffs. By controlling the narrative, those in power control the reality of those who listen. But the influence of language extends beyond external manipulation, it seeps inward, shaping self-perception. When you internalize labels like smart or lazy, you begin to live up to, or down to, them, regardless of whether they accurately reflect your abilities. This process, known as self-fulfilling prophecy, demonstrates how words don't just describe identity, they create it. Arthur Schopenhauer offers another lens through which to examine this issue. He believed that suffering arises from attachment to desires, expectations, and ultimately, to the illusion of permanence. Language plays a central role in perpetuating this attachment by giving names to fleeting experiences and convincing you that they are fixed entities. For example, when you say, "I am happy" or "I am sad," you imply that happiness or sadness is a permanent state rather than a transient emotion. This linguistic habit reinforces the belief that emotions define you, trapping you in cycles of identification and resistance. To break free, Schopenhauer argued, requires seeing through the veil of language to recognize the impermanence of all things. Yet the problem runs even deeper than individual psychology, it permeates entire societies. Sociologist Pierre Bourdieu described this phenomenon as symbolic violence, the subtle ways in which dominant groups impose their worldview onto others through language. Consider how colonial powers imposed their languages on indigenous populations, erasing native tongues and, with them, entire systems of knowledge, culture, and identity. Even today, globalized media perpetuate similar forms of symbolic violence, privileging certain narratives while silencing others. The result is a homogenized worldview that marginalizes diversity and stifles innovation. Neuroscience provides yet another layer of insight into why language holds such sway. Research shows that the brain processes words not as abstract symbols but as embodied experiences. When you hear the word lemon, for instance, the same neural pathways associated with sourness light up as if you were tasting one. Similarly, metaphors like broken heart or heavy burden trigger physical sensations that reinforce their emotional impact. This suggests that language isn't just a mental construct, it's woven into the fabric of your sensory experience. By shaping how you perceive and respond to stimuli, words quite literally alter the wiring of your brain. And then there's the existential dimension of language, explored by thinkers like Jean-Paul Sartre and Viktor Frankl. Sartre argued that humans are condemned to be free, burdened by the responsibility of defining their own purpose in a world devoid of inherent meaning. Language complicates this freedom by offering prepackaged definitions of success, love, morality, and fulfillment. Without critical examination, these inherited scripts can trap you in lives that feel hollow or misaligned. Frankl, however, offered a counterpoint: meaning arises not from avoiding suffering but from transcending it. By choosing your response to life's challenges, and the words you use to frame them, you reclaim agency over your reality. Here lies the crux of the matter: language is both liberator and jailer. It empowers you to articulate dreams, forge connections, and navigate complexity, but it also confines you within frameworks of thought that may no longer serve you. Each word you speak reinforces a particular version of reality, making it increasingly difficult to imagine alternatives. And yet, breaking free from this cycle demands more than rejecting language altogether. It requires reimagining how you use it. Can you strip words of their baggage and wield them consciously? Can you question the assumptions embedded in everyday phrases and seek new ways of expressing truth? As you reflect on these insights, consider the weight of the chains binding you to linguistic conformity. Some are forged from habit, others from fear, and still others from the story society has told you about who you are and what you're capable of achieving. Beneath these constraints lies a spark of potential, waiting to ignite if only you dare to strike the match. Now, let us peer into the shadows cast by language, the silent, insidious ways it shapes not only your thoughts but the very fabric of society. Words are more than tools, they are forces that ripple outward, influencing emotions, relationships, and systems in ways you may never fully comprehend. When left unchecked, these ripples become waves, crashing against the shores of personal and collective existence, leaving behind debris that alters landscapes forever. Consider the psychological toll of living within a linguistic framework that prioritizes certain narratives while erasing others. Imagine growing up in a culture where words like ambition and productivity dominate discourse, equating worth with output and success with material gain. What happens to those whose strengths lie outside this narrow definition? They learn to silence their authentic selves, conforming instead to ideals that feel foreign, or worse, unattainable. Over time, this dissonance breeds anxiety, depression, and a gnawing sense of inadequacy. The language you use doesn't just describe reality, it creates hierarchies of value, determining who is seen and who fades into invisibility. But the damage extends beyond individual suffering. When entire groups are marginalized through language, the consequences reverberate across generations. Think about how colonial powers imposed their tongues on conquered lands, replacing native languages with imperial ones. This wasn't merely an act of communication, it was an act of erasure. With each lost word, entire worlds disappeared, histories, traditions, philosophies, cosmologies. Even today, indigenous communities struggle to reclaim their voices after centuries of suppression. And yet, the impact isn't limited to colonization alone. Modern societies perpetuate similar forms of symbolic violence through media, education, and politics, privileging dominant narratives while dismissing dissenting perspectives. The result? A fragmented collective consciousness, unable to envision unity amidst diversity. Language also plays a sinister role in perpetuating cognitive biases, mental shortcuts that distort perception and decision-making. Take confirmation bias, for example. When you encounter information that aligns with your existing beliefs, you're more likely to accept it as true, reinforcing the linguistic frameworks you've already internalized. Conversely, evidence that challenges your worldview often feels jarring, even threatening, because it disrupts the narrative you've constructed around yourself. This dynamic creates echo chambers, both internally and externally, where dissenting voices are drowned out by the cacophony of consensus. Social media amplifies this effect, feeding algorithms designed to validate your biases rather than challenge them. Before long, you find yourself trapped in a feedback loop, mistaking repetition for truth. And then there's the phenomenon of linguistic relativity, popularly known as the Sapir-Whorf hypothesis. While debated among linguists, its core idea remains compelling. The structure of a language influences, and sometimes determines, how speakers perceive and interact with the world. For instance, some languages lack distinct terms for colors like blue or green, causing speakers to group these hues under a single category. Does this mean they literally see fewer colors, or simply categorize them differently? Either way, the implication is profound. Without the right words, aspects of reality remain inaccessible. Now extend this principle to broader domains, emotions, ethics, spirituality, and consider what possibilities vanish when your lexicon falls short. Even more alarming is how language shapes societal structures and power dynamics. George Orwell understood this better than most, famously warning of newspeak, a fictional language engineered to eliminate rebellious thought by reducing vocabulary to its bare minimum. In his dystopian vision, fewer words meant fewer ideas, stripping citizens of the ability to articulate dissent. While no real-world regime has achieved such extremes, elements of newspeak persist in modern rhetoric. Politicians sanitize atrocities with euphemisms like collateral damage or enhanced interrogation. Corporations disguise exploitation behind phrases like cost optimization or market disruption. These linguistic sleights of hand obscure harsh truths, enabling injustices to continue unchecked. Language becomes not just a mirror of power but a weapon wielded by those who hold it. On a neurological level, the effects of language are equally profound. Studies show that repeated exposure to specific words rewires the brain, strengthening neural pathways associated with those concepts. This process, known as neuroplasticity, explains why negative self-talk can spiral into chronic low self-esteem, or why affirmations, when practiced consistently, can foster resilience. But here's the catch: most people aren't aware of how much their inner dialogue is shaped by external forces. From childhood, you absorb messages from family, peers, media, and institutions, unconsciously adopting scripts that dictate everything from your ambitions to your insecurities. By the time you reach adulthood, these narratives feel indistinguishable from identity itself. This entanglement of language and identity leads to another troubling consequence: the erosion of critical thinking. When words carry implicit authority, whether from tradition, expertise, or sheer repetition, they discourage questioning. Why scrutinize a label if everyone else accepts it as fact? This complacency allows harmful ideologies to flourish unchecked. Consider how terms like normal or natural are used to justify exclusionary practices, framing difference as deviation rather than diversity. Or how slogans like freedom or justice are co-opted to mask agendas rooted in greed or oppression. Without vigilance, language ceases to be a tool of empowerment and becomes a mechanism of control. Perhaps the most pervasive consequence of all is the normalization of apathy. When words fail to capture the complexity of human experience, empathy falters. Describing war zones as conflict regions or refugees as migrants strips away individual stories, reducing lives to statistics. Similarly, labeling climate change as a debate undermines urgency, creating space for denialism to thrive. Once detached from visceral emotion, issues lose their immediacy, allowing indifference to take root. After all, it's easier to ignore problems when they feel abstract rather than personal. And yet, despite these harrowing outcomes, few recognize the urgency of escaping this trap. Why? Because language masquerades as neutral, a passive medium through which ideas flow freely. But neutrality is an illusion. Every sentence you utter carries weight, shaping not just what you think but how you think. Each word reinforces a particular version of reality, making alternatives increasingly difficult to imagine. To break free requires confronting this hidden force head-on, dismantling the frameworks that constrain your mind and rebuilding new ones in their place. So ask yourself, what will it take for you to wake up? Will you wait until the cracks in your foundation widen into chasms, or will you seize control before collapse becomes unavoidable? Remember, the chains holding you back are powerful, but not invincible. They thrive on ignorance, fear, and denial. Shine a light on them, and their grip begins to loosen. Challenge them, and they falter. Replace them with intention, and they dissolve altogether. To break free from the invisible chains of language, you must first recognize that rebellion isn't an act of destruction, it's an act of creation. It begins with dismantling the narratives, habits, and assumptions that have shaped your reality for years, but it doesn't end there. True liberation requires building something new in their place, a conscious, intentional relationship with words that empowers rather than confines. This process is neither easy nor comfortable, but it is profoundly transformative. Let us explore how to ignite this revolution within. The first step toward reclaiming control is cultivating awareness, the ability to observe language not as a passive tool, but as an active force. Start by listening closely to the words you use every day. What stories do they tell? Whose voices do they amplify? Whose experiences do they erase? Consider phrases like "I'm just not good at this," or "things will never change." These seemingly innocuous statements carry immense weight, reinforcing limiting beliefs and shutting down possibilities before they even arise. By becoming mindful of your linguistic habits, you begin to see how deeply intertwined language is with your perception of self and world. Awareness alone won't dismantle these patterns, but it lays the foundation for transformation. Once you've identified the scripts running beneath your thoughts, the next challenge is to question them relentlessly. Every word carries baggage, cultural, historical, psychological, and much of it operates below the level of conscious thought. To uncover these hidden layers, adopt a mindset of radical curiosity. Ask yourself, why do I describe failure as catastrophic rather than instructive? Who taught me to equate worth with productivity? What alternative meanings might exist beyond the ones I've inherited? Philosophers like Friedrich Nietzsche understood the power of such questioning. He urged individuals to examine the origins of their values, challenging societal norms that stifle authenticity. Similarly, your task is to interrogate the frameworks you've accepted without scrutiny, seeking clarity amidst the chaos. But deconstructing old narratives isn't enough, you must also construct new ones. This requires expanding your vocabulary, both literally and metaphorically. Literal expansion involves learning new words and concepts that open doors to previously inaccessible ideas. For example, reading poetry, philosophy, or literature from unfamiliar cultures can introduce fresh perspectives, enriching your mental landscape. Metaphorical expansion, on the other hand, means reimagining how you use existing language. Instead of describing emotions as static states, "I am sad," frame them as dynamic processes. "Sadness is moving through me." Such shifts may seem subtle, but over time, they reshape how you experience and interact with the world. Historical examples abound of individuals who defied linguistic constraints to forge new realities. Consider Malala Yousafzai, whose eloquent defiance transformed global conversations about education and gender equality. Or James Baldwin, whose incisive prose exposed the insidious nature of systemic racism, reframing societal discourse around justice and identity. These figures remind us that language, when wielded consciously, becomes a weapon against oppression and a beacon of hope. Their stories teach us that rebellion isn't about grand gestures, it's about persistence. It's choosing truth over comfort, authenticity over conformity, and freedom over fear. Another powerful tool in your arsenal is storytelling, the act of crafting narratives that reflect your deepest truths. Too often, we allow external forces to define our stories, accepting labels imposed by society or circumstance. Reclaiming authorship means rejecting these prefabricated scripts and writing your own. Begin by asking, what story do I want to tell about my life? Not the one others expect, but the one that resonates with your soul. Then, embody that narrative through deliberate action and expression. Each word you choose becomes a brushstroke, painting a portrait of who you are, and who you aspire to be. And yet, individual rebellion alone isn't sufficient. Language is inherently social, shaping and being shaped by collective consciousness. To effect broader change, you must engage in dialogue, not as a battleground for dominance, but as a space for mutual understanding. Listen deeply to others' stories, recognizing the humanity behind their words. Speak courageously, sharing your truth without fear of judgment. In doing so, you contribute to a shared lexicon rooted in empathy and inclusivity. As philosopher Martin Buber argued, authentic communication arises from the 5-hour relationship, a connection based on presence and respect rather than transactional exchange. By fostering such connections, you help dismantle the divisive rhetoric that perpetuates injustice. Neuroscience offers further insight into how to rewire your brain for linguistic empowerment. Research shows that practicing gratitude, mindfulness, and positive affirmation strengthens neural pathways associated with resilience and well-being. Similarly, engaging in creative activities like journaling, poetry, or improvisation stimulates regions of the brain linked to imagination and problem-solving. These practices not only expand your expressive capacity but also reinforce a sense of agency over your inner world. Over time, they transform language from a source of constraint into a catalyst for growth. Finally, embrace paradox, the recognition that language is both liberator and jailer, creator and destroyer. To reject it entirely would render communication impossible, to accept it uncritically would perpetuate its limitations. Instead, strive for balance, use words consciously, aware of their power to shape reality while remaining vigilant against their potential to distort it. As Carl Jung observed, integration, not rejection, is key to transcending dualities. By holding space for contradiction, you unlock the full spectrum of human experience, embracing complexity rather than fleeing from it. Imagine standing once more at the edge of that fragile glass lake, staring into the abyss below. This time, however, you don't hesitate. You take a step forward, letting the cracks spread outward in intricate patterns. The surface shatters, revealing not darkness but light, a kaleidoscope of possibilities waiting to be explored. With each word you speak, you weave new threads into the tapestry of existence, creating a reality aligned with your deepest values and aspirations. Now, let us arrive at the heart of the matter, the ultimate truth that redefines not only how you see language, but how you perceive existence itself. It is a revelation so profound that it dismantles the very frameworks through which you've understood thought, identity, and reality. To grasp this truth, you must first unlearn everything you believe about silence and speech, creation and destruction, control and surrender. What lies ahead is not merely an endpoint, it is a paradigm shift, a moment of awakening that will leave you forever altered. Here is the paradox: language is both the prison and the key to freedom. Silence, too, holds this dual nature. It can be a refuge from noise or a barrier to connection. Together, they form a continuum, a dance between presence and absence, sound and stillness, form and void. To reject one in favor of the other is to deny the fullness of human experience. True mastery lies not in choosing sides, but in embracing their interdependence. Words shape reality, but so does the space between them. In that space resides the raw potential for transformation, waiting to be harnessed. Consider the philosophy of Taoism, which teaches that all things arise from the interplay of opposites, yin and yang, light and dark, movement and stillness. Applied to language, this principle reveals that meaning emerges not solely from what is said, but also from what remains unsaid. A poem's power often lies in its pauses, just as a conversation's depth depends on moments of listening. Silence isn't emptiness, it's fertile ground where ideas gestate before taking form. When you speak without regard for this balance, you risk overwhelming the listener, or yourself, with noise. But when you honor the rhythm of speech and silence, you create harmony, allowing truth to resonate more deeply. This perspective transforms how we view communication. For centuries, philosophers have debated whether language reflects reality or constructs it. Both perspectives contain kernels of truth, but neither captures the whole picture. Language is not merely a mirror or a builder, it is a bridge, spanning the gap between inner worlds and outer experiences. Each word you utter carries fragments of your essence, shaping not only how others see you but how you see yourself. Yet, like any bridge, it requires maintenance. Without conscious effort, it can crumble under the weight of miscommunication, bias, and distortion. But here's where the paradox deepens: while words connect, they also divide. Every label you assign creates boundaries, separating this from that, us from them. These distinctions are necessary for comprehension, but they come at a cost. By categorizing, you fragment the unity of existence, reducing infinite complexity to finite terms. Think about how political rhetoric divides societies into opposing camps, each side convinced of its moral superiority. Or how social media algorithms amplify polarization, reinforcing echo chambers that stifle dialogue. Language, when wielded carelessly, becomes a weapon of separation rather than connection. And yet, even division has its purpose. As Arthur Schopenhauer observed, suffering arises from attachment to desires, expectations, and ultimately, to the illusion of permanence. Language perpetuates this attachment by giving names to fleeting experiences and convincing you that they are fixed entities. But what if the act of naming could also serve as a reminder of impermanence? What if every word carried within it the seed of its own dissolution, pointing beyond itself to the ever-changing flow of life? To see this clearly is to transcend the limitations of language, using it not as a cage, but as a window. This realization aligns closely with existentialist thought, particularly Jean-Paul Sartre's emphasis on radical freedom. While Sartre argued that life has no inherent meaning, he also believed that humans possess the power and responsibility to create their own. Language becomes a tool for this creation, enabling you to articulate values, forge connections, and envision futures. But it also demands accountability. Every sentence you construct shapes not only your reality, but the collective consciousness of humanity. Will you use words to build walls or bridges? To oppress or uplift? To obscure or illuminate? Ultimately, the greatest barrier to true liberation is not language itself, it is the belief that mastery over words equates to control over reality. The moment you realize that language is a co-creative force, shaped as much by context and interpretation as by intent, you step into a new paradigm. No longer do you view communication as a means of domination. Instead, you see it as an invitation, a sacred exchange between speaker and listener, self and world. This shift requires humility, recognizing that meaning is never fixed, always evolving. As you reflect on this revelation, consider the words of Viktor Frankl: between stimulus and response, there is a space. In that space is our power to choose our response. That space is silence, the fertile void where possibilities germinate. When you inhabit it fully, you reclaim agency over your thoughts, emotions, and actions. You become not a passive recipient of linguistic influence, but an active participant in shaping reality. And in doing so, you awaken to the profound interconnectedness of all things. Imagine standing once more at the edge of that glass lake, now transformed into a shimmering expanse of infinite possibility. The cracks beneath your feet no longer threaten collapse, they radiate outward, illuminating paths previously unseen. Each word you speak sends ripples across the surface, creating patterns that blend seamlessly with those of others. Together, these ripples form waves, carrying stories, ideas, and dreams toward distant shores. In this moment, you understand that language isn't merely a tool, it's a living entity, breathing and evolving alongside you. So now, ask yourself one final question: who will you choose to be, or not tomorrow, not next year, but right now, in this very instant? Will you remain tethered to inherited scripts, or will you embrace the fluidity of becoming, knowing that every word you utter shapes not only your future but the collective tapestry of humanity? Let this realization haunt you, inspire you, challenge you. Let it remind you that life is not a puzzle to be solved, but a mystery to be lived. Through language, you have the power to craft narratives that reflect your deepest truths, or to dismantle those that constrain you. The choice is yours, and yours alone. The journey ends where it began, with you. But now, armed with this newfound understanding, you are no longer the same person who hesitated at the water's edge. You are someone new, someone braver, someone willing to step boldly into the unknown. Go forth and write your story, not with pen and paper, but with the choices you make, the risks you take, and the love you give. For in doing so, you honor not just yourself, but the eternal rhythm of existence itself.